Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm going to be your moderator, Nick Pallavita. And we're going to be discussing a very important issue today, which, of course, is, again, the national debt, which does tend to be ignored. But also, even more important, is the PPP loans, which in this case amounted to $797 billion. And it looks like what they're doing is they're going to forgive, if they haven't already, forgiving 797 of the $800 billion in loans that were made in what they call PPP loans. So with that, we do have a very special guest. He's a former associate dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law. And also we have people joining in us from Australia. So we're going to bring them up to date what's happening in the United States. First of all, Dr. Dan Worthington has joined us from the United States of America, and Shaquille Latimer and Derek Whitaker have joined us from down under. And they're probably not even familiar with the issue that took place here in the United States, which is this. The U.S. issued $800 billion, which, by the way, dwarfs your entire economy, as we well know, in what they call PP. What?
It's only half our economy.
Half your economy? You're sure? You have to do a fact check on it. Your entire economy, or half your economy. Okay, so Shaquille, here's what we did. We issued $800 billion in PPP loans to the top quintile of American society, including one of my companies who got more north of $250,000 in PPP loans. Okay. And that we understood that to be a loan. We understood it to be paid back. At least that's still our position at our company. Then your friend Joe Biden and Donald Trump wave their magic wand and forgive $797 billion in loans, creating an additional national debt of $797 billion.
Well, let's clarify that, Nick. First of all,
the world. Yes.
First of all, it wasn't Trump and Biden; it was Congress. Congress approved the cancellation of the PPP loans. It was done under the Small Business Administration. So that's a big difference because Congress authorized it. Was it a good idea? I don't know. But that's the difference between the PPP loans and the student debt issue. If Biden wants to eliminate or cancel student debt, what he has to do is march down to Congress and get them to agree to do it, because he knows he can't get them to agree to do it. And he knows the Supreme Court has already said he doesn't have the authority to do it. He whines and complains. He's not ever have had the authority to do it. He gave those kids false promises, relying on his word, which nobody can rely on Joe Biden's word. And that's the reason is because he doesn't have congressional approval. I mean, go to Congress. If Congress thinks it's such a good idea, then have them do it. They did forgive the PPP loans. That was part of the congressional authority when they issued the PPP loans because of the COVID emergency. I'm ambivalent on student debt. I paid mine off, all $65,000 of it. So it's sort of like, I don't feel like we owe the kids anything if they accumulated the debt, absent some sort of fraud by the institutions that they took the debt to go to. So, that's what I'm feeling. If Biden wants this so bad, go to Congress and see if he can get it. What I understand is the Republicans have been working on some sort of debt relief package that is more balanced than just let's forget it all and wipe it off. This is one of the largest assets in the U.S. in the U.S. Economy right now is this student debt, right? So you can't forgive it. It's like, especially given the fact of our large deficits and everything else. Now, I think the PPP loans were more of an economic infusion into the economy for businesses that then they had to do spend that money on specific things, employee wages or certain other things. It wasn't just willy-nilly in order for them to get that forgiven. So that instead of laying off employees, they had to keep their employees on and they had to pay them. And that was part of the requirement for the PPP loans. And so there wasn't a free ride. There were certain requirements that Congress required for the cancellation of the PPP loans.
Okay, I think that's a very weak argument, and the reason why
It's what happened,
right?
I know
Yeah,
what
I
happened.
can't help it.
I think it was really weak by Congress to do that. First of all, we have to imagine the U.S. debt, $31 trillion. It exceeds the U.S. mortgage amount of $11 trillion. It's massive. Number two, when we're looking at this would have been the biggest balance sheet item on the much bigger than the student loans. Or almost as big, not as big as student loans, but it's pretty big.
No, not as big as student loans.
The student loans are 1.6 trillion, but 797 billion isn't chopped liver, as they said. The 797 billion went to the top quintile of American public. And how could they?
What was it used for? What was it?
It was used to dupe the American public in believing that if listen, dude,
right?
you pay my labor, you pay my
wages,
rent,
then what
and
happens?
I end up as the business owner more profitable.
Government. And I believe a lot of businesses just commit fraud.
Dan, no, it's not fraudulent. Dan, come in and pay my labor costs. Come in and pay my rent. And
why don't you go ahead and lay your people off because you can't afford them? Because
that happened in 2008.
Well,
That's called capitalism.
Right? Let me just jump in here.
Get over it. It's capitalism.
Let me jump in
that
here.
in 2008.
Let me jump in. So firstly, I will just remind you that Derek is American. So when you say that we don't know America, just be reminded.
Well, he didn't get a PPP loan, Derek.
The second thing. Well, I can. Do you mind if I confirm what you received in the mail? I won't talk about it then. The second thing that I will just say is you talk about this going to the very top and ignore the rules about what they were supposed to use that money for, regardless of the fraud that is probably being committed there, Dan. But what about the government paying people to stay out of the workforce and driving up inflation? Do we blame the government in any way for that, or that's okay? It's okay.
Well, we should have.
Can I raise my hand on this one? You know, out of the trillions that they gave the millionaires who had businesses on this situation, they gave each person probably $1,700 to stay home. I don't think that was a lot of money. There were a few people who got to collect unemployment, but
I agree.
For the most part,
given him any money.
They shouldn't have. So here's my argument. Everyone, the people that got the PPP loans, they were adults who could generally qualify for a fairly large loan anyway, in reality. And they understood the terms. They fully understood the terms. And somehow or another, the Congress came out and said, you know what, we're going to forgive all of those loans, whether you paid your employees with it or not. And then, people bitch and moan, excuse my language, about a student loan being forgiven. And these were minors who were provided a loan without truly explaining to them what the loan terms were. They would have never, under any circumstances, qualified for that loan. And so I think our biggest deficit was caused by all of the trillions of dollars that was given away during the PPP. Now, Warren Buffett has a solution. Have you heard it? Have you heard Warren Buffett's solution?
Besides getting rid of Congress, what is it?
Well, I'll play it for you here. Just give me a sec.
Oh, you can.
While you're looking for that, can I just
Is this Jimmy Buffett or Warren Buffett?
Different things.
Warren Buffett, Jimmy Buffett.
Congress has not voted down the student loans. Biden never gave it to him in the first place. He never gave it.
The solution is. Here you go.
Everyone hear what Jimmy has to say.
anytime there's a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress, now you've got the incentives in the right place, right? So it's capable of being done. And they're trying to use the incentive now that we're going to blow your brains out, America, in terms of and that's being used as a threat. A more effective threat would be just to say, if you guys can't get it done, we'll get some other guys to get it done.
Hire you like we would anybody else in any other job. So
bandwidth issues.
A couple of things. You made
I like 100% from when. Well, I think the PPP loans caused majority of our problems. The adults who got them and understood them. But I think that's where our deficit truly rides from.
But that may well be the case, but the way you've described it is if government turned around and said, okay, I'm going to give you money based on how wealthy you are, so the millionaires just got all this money. And the other thing that you did was you said you don't understand why people are whinging about the student debt forgiveness. Well, there's a number of reasons why, because it's not fair on people that have already paid off their loans, it's not fair to the next generation of people, etc. But more importantly, for that argument to hold true, it would have to be sent to Congress and rejected. It hasn't been sent to Congress. And the executive branch doesn't have the ability legally to just make these sorts of things on the fly. It has to be passed by Congress. And I would also make the argument, by the way, that those district attorneys and those police departments that refuse to enforce laws, they have absolutely no constitutional right to do that. What they are doing is they are overturning the legislative intent of the rules that are in place. If a crime has been committed, the executive branch has an obligation to prosecute those crimes. Not doing so, I think anybody who doesn't do so should be immediately impeached, because that's not their job. Their job is not to use their discretion on legislative intent.
Great, and that's the reason Trump's being indicted then. Thank you. But in spite of that,
Biden will soon be indicted, yeah.
That's also the reason why Hunter Biden...
In spite of that red herring...
Oh, Hunter Biden, let's go into that one.
In spite of that red herring and trying to get away from the issue...
Maybe I'll come to the United States and see if I can not pay you.
I noticed all the arguments. It's okay for us to go into huge debt. It's okay for us to support the quinti-millionaires and the big businesses, but it's not okay to support the dumb students.
Okay, so no one said it was okay.
If you take those same arguments, Counselor, and you use it to say, well, we shouldn't have allowed $797 billion to be given away to the richest people in the United States, but they control Congress. They kept their mouth shut. They took the money. They profited. Okay, the students.
Hey Nick, quick question for you. It actually ties the two issues together, two issues that are going on together and everything. So, a quick question for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well. After affirmative action was pretty much thrown out with the Supreme Court and all in that space, UNC, and I think Duke did the same thing, have come up with this great idea, and I think you alluded to it before, that Georgia has done it before, but they are now going to give free tuition and fees for state residents whose families earn under $80,000 annually. Right. So if you make less than $80,000, you will get free tuition. But I was wondering what folks' thoughts were about this, because it was a direct response to what happened with the affirmative action case and everything.
Well, you still have to get in, right? And so it doesn't solve the problem of affirmative action, but it solves the problem for poor students. They get Pell Grants anyway. So I don't know. Did they get a twofer? Is that how it works? They get a double benefit with Pell Grants and a tuition waiver? I don't know how it works.
Well, you're allowed to discriminate based on...
I'd like to come back to Nick for a second. So, Nick, firstly, the argument was never made the way that you just described it. I don't think government should be in the business of handing out other people's money in the first place, regardless of who it is going to. But secondly, not every millionaire or billionaire received this money. They had to actually own a business. And Mark, to your point, well, does that mean
how many millionaires and billionaires don't own business?
It's documented.
There are some that are retired.
You got cut off.
As such, right? But Mark,
it's already documented that amount of money is out there, so you can't say that millionaires and billionaires didn't get it. That money is gone.
Yeah, Jacoby, that's not what I said.
It was gone.
That wasn't what I said. So
and we're all paying for it, baby.
Mark, to your point,
we bet we are.
Those universities are going to subsidise the cost of those students by increasing the charges on other students. There might be some unfairness in that, but I will say this. With affirmative action, my point has been over the last few years that we've been talking about it, is that you need to be helping the people that are the most disadvantaged in the community, not based on just skin color, but based on their economic conditions. So I think that that's actually a step in a positive direction.
No, why was affirmative action created?
Direction to actually bring students who are in minority communities who don't perhaps have the grades that they need and give them extra assistance, give them special bridging courses to help them to get the grades and to get the knowledge that they need to be able to enroll in these subjects, these universities, and be able to keep up with their peer group. Those are things I think would be very helpful, but just having a blanket affirmative action program.
Why was affirmative action created?
To discriminate against non-minorities. Yeah.
No. Why was it created? You're making up stuff. Why you
discriminate? It's racist. That's why it was.
No, it wasn't. Why was it created?
Well, Toby, just tell us what it is that you want to say. Why do you want to ask us all these questions? Just tell us the thing that you want to say.
I want to know I just want to know where your educational background is coming from on the situation, so we can.
See, that's what you do. You always demean people about their educational background.
I'm asking you a question.
Let me tell you what my educational
background. Answer for you. You want to know my education.
Lawyer. What about you? What did you ever do in your schooling?
Why was it created? You guys are arguing and taking things personal. Why was it created?
No,
because the South is still fighting the Civil War.
Jacoby, you said you wanted to know what my education was. I think we have established very well over previous episodes that you know everything. I'm an idiot. So why don't you just inform me and educate me?
It was created to create racial preferences for minorities. That's
why was it again. So again, right now I've got Shaq. You're yelling that. I'm insulting your intelligence by asking you a question, and Dan, I'm getting from you.
Did you hear me yell?
Oh, that's your prick. Yeah,
they didn't fight. They didn't fight the Civil War in Australia last time I looked.
They didn't. Yeah. No.
Nope. It's not an Aussie thing, baby. It's
a maybe coming in Australia. I mean,
you know what? They didn't even fight it out west. Really, it's only the South. Well, and if you're down in the South, they're still fighting the bloody Civil War.
300,000 white folks that died
never stop.
Freedom of slavery, right? Slaves, right?
Yeah,
who's going to pay them the reparations, Jacoby?
Yeah,
they get reparations from my great-great-grandfather fighting for the freedom of.
So, Jacoby, was there a point that you wanted to make, or you were just curious about what education that we've had?
The point that I'm trying to make is that how the argument about affirmative action being taken away makes everything equal. That's untrue, because the reason affirmative action was created has that reason left our society in terms of so everything
it has in some places, yes.
Yeah, and the other
people. South, you guys
what they're going is more towards
North Carolina's
social economic formulas rather than race baiting ones, right? Yeah.
No, I'm just pointing out there's data out there that we have. If
it's called discrimination, Jacoby, it's called discrimination.
That's what it's in the South.
So if you set up racial quotas,
not in Australia,
it's called discrimination because you're accepting one student over another based on their race.
Dan, here's a question. Are minorities paid the same as other as Caucasians?
In some parts of the country,
in some cases, minorities are paid.
Well, it depends on what their families are like.
And it's the same thing for
white folks. You got rich black folks,
in the women's issue as well. When they put out the data that states that
you got minorities are
paid less than their white counterparts. Women are paid less than their male counterparts. Are you stating here and now?
Why are they paid less, Jacoby? Is it because of
are you stating that their data is wrong?
Or what is it?
The data
you have to look deeper at the issues.
As the person who looks at statistics all the time, I'm not saying the data is wrong. I'm saying you're wrong. I'm saying that
makes absolutely no sense. I'm pointing to the data. I'm asking you if the data is wrong.
I'm answering you. I'm answering.
Your data is always skewed. You
have selectively picked bits of data and skewed it to fit your ideas on what is right and what is wrong. We also have talked about minority communities as if all minority communities are experiencing the same thing, and that's just not true either.
Shaq, when I'm pointing to the data of the U.S., where they point out that minorities are paid less than their white counterparts, I'm pointing to the data. You're saying that I am wrong because I'm pointing to the data.
I'm saying that you are selective. I'm saying exactly what I said. You selectively pick the data points.
So I've selectively picked that minorities are paid less than their white counterparts. I've selectively picked.
That's correct, Jamie.
Even though it's the data that is out there. So you're saying the data is incorrect.
No, I didn't say. I'm going to be very, very clear. Don't reword what I've said to say something that I specifically didn't say. I didn't say the data was wrong. I said your interpretation of the data and the way that you're looking at the data and the way that you're picking the data is incorrect, in my view.
So again,
I know that's mind blowing for you because
I know because this makes no sense.
Hold on, listen. He found it on Google.
And no other opinion other than yours could possibly have any merit.
Here's an example.
It's got to be true.
But yes,
I'm pointing to this sheet of paper. I'm saying that this sheet of paper says this data. You're saying
those are both blank.
Pointing at this sheet of paper is wrong because this sheet of paper is not this data.
Well, you don't have anything on either one of them.
You can pull all the usual stunts that you do and try to act all horrified and stunned and all the rest of it. I've already answered your question. I've answered it multiple times. You could use a whole heap of other analogies.
So the data is correct.
But I've answered your question.
Well, let's give you an example.
The data is correct then.
You want to give an example?
The data is correct.
White on white.
Not me looking at the data. You're saying the data is
black on black, right? Let's
the
look
data
at that.
is correct. Is that right?
You say there are more. You say there are more black on black murders than white on white murders. Well, there are statistically. And
statistically, there are more white on white murders than black on black.
The numbers are basically the same, but as a percentage of the population, they're not.
Show me the
you
data
want to skew the data to achieve the
FBI data.
So hold on a second. So the majority population will not have more crime than the minority population, and all along those lines. But on the flip side of that,
that's an example of your skewing the data.
Jack, this is where the problem comes into play.
Again,
what is the population of the U.S.? What is the population of the U.S.? The U.S. is 330 billion people. And then on top of that, if you take a look at the data, the minority population or the black on black crime that you're wanting to talk about, that is only between 13 to 17% of that 330 million people. So when we're talking about black on black crime, you're saying that 50 to 60% of the population has less crime than 13% of the population?
Yeah, that's what happened.
Jacoby, and again,
we need to
as
a percentage. And we got Dave Walker here, so we got a real.
We have David Walker here, and we're going to be discussing this interesting issue that was, by the way, brought out by you, Jacoby, which is the reason you're here, because this was your issue, but it's a pretty strong issue. PPP loans, $797 billion was forgiven when we have a U.S. national debt of $31 trillion, yet $42 billion in student loans were not forgiven. David, what do you think about this massive giveaway of $797 billion that's not being discussed by the media, except all of us that received them got paid off, so we don't want to say anything? What's your thoughts?
Well, first, it was $420 billion at a minimum for student loans, and I'll come back to that. Almost $800 billion with regard to PPP loans. And we also know that there's probably $200 billion worth of fraud, waste, and abuse in the PPP loans that people aren't talking about very much. We also know that there's a number of elected officials who benefited from PPP loans that people aren't talking very much about. Okay. And so let's talk about both. First, the government shut down much of the economy. That was a unilateral action by the government. And because the unilateral action by the government did that, similar to what happened after 9/11, when the government shut down airspace for several days. Okay. Because of that, the government felt that it had an obligation to do something for those that were adversely affected. Now, I don't think it was designed properly. I don't think it was effectively implemented. There were clearly not adequate internal controls, because we got at least $200 billion worth of fraud, waste, and abuse associated with that. But the fundamental premise was the government took a unilateral action that had an adverse impact on the private sector, especially certain businesses, and something needed to be done about it. In the case of student loans, a little bit different. Okay, the government did not take any unilateral action. Okay, people had a choice whether or not they wanted to take out student loans or not. Clearly, there was inadequate knowledge on behalf of individuals and inadequate disclosure so that people could make a more informed decision. We've talked about this before with regard to the need for financial literacy education, okay, as well as civic responsibility education. But the difference is, in the case of PPP, in addition to the fact that the government took a unilateral action, that was legislation that was passed in the House, passed in the Senate, signed by the president. In the case of student loans, the biggest problem with his student loan proposal is that he was trying to take a unilateral executive action based upon a piece of legislation that was passed in 2003 called the HEROES Act, which was intended to benefit primarily people who were going into the military as a result of the aftermath of 9/11, 2001, and tried to apply that concept to people who took student loans. It was inequitable, it was fiscally irresponsible, and it was, I've said for over a year, it was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court has agreed. And I think now the president is trying to go to look at the Higher Education Act, which is from the 1960s, and he's going to try to see if he can make it work under the Higher Education Act. And my gut feeling is you're going to end up the same place.
Yeah.
It's going to be struck down as unconstitutional.
Hey, David, just out of curiosity, should we have
Mark? I was just going to jump in real quick, because the issue, the reason I brought up the issue,
sure,
was the fact that, and yeah, the passing it through legislatively, I mean, understand that, and the way that Biden went about it to do the student loan piece. But the outrage, everybody jumped on board legislatively and was for the $800 billion, yeah, and even about even a lot of the forgiveness and the $800 billion in forgiveness. Right. And then we find out, of course, the waste, fraud, and abuse, the fraud and abuse that was in there.
Oh yeah.
But we argue tooth and nail against the student loan part. We don't fight for or agree legislatively that the student loan part, the investments in education that can help get a lot of these individuals out of from under a rock to move forward. We argue against that, but argue for business.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And first, let me just say that I think the PPP program was poorly designed, ineffectively implemented, and we wasted huge amounts of money on that. All right, so let's just say that. The legal issue is the fact that it was legislation, was agreed to, so you don't have a constitutional problem. But, all right, and my personal view is the government threw too much money out all at once as a result of COVID, which is one of the reasons we have excess inflation right now, because you got too much money chasing too few goods, and therefore that causes inflation.
Although we do have the lowest inflation out of all the countries that we're fighting it right now, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. But it's less than half what it was.
Yeah.
Okay. At the peak, it's double what the target rate is. Okay. But in any event, look, the student loan program needs to be fundamentally re-engineered. Okay. And there's absolutely no question about that. And it's a multifaceted thing. First, we need to have more financial literacy so people can make a more informed decision about what they're doing, what they can afford, what they can't afford. Secondly, my personal view is that you shouldn't be given student loans for any kind of college, for any kind of degree, because they're not marketable. I mean, some of these degrees are flat, just not marketable. All right. So we need to have a more educated approach as to when are we making these loans. The terms need to be more reasonable. All right. And there ought to be some forgiveness. But what the forgiveness ought to be is when the individual does something that benefits the public at large. For example, they go into the military. They go into an occupation where we have a supply and demand imbalance and we need more people, in that particular occupation. They do public service through a not-for-profit or something. In other words, the idea that we're just going to forgive all the loans, irrespective of what college, irrespective of what degree, when people don't perform any service whatsoever, I don't think that will ever pass the Congress. On the other hand, reforming the student loan program, providing more reasonable terms, and providing some student loan relief in exchange for service, not necessarily with the government, not necessarily with the military, but in areas where we have a national need. Another example is this, like immigration. Our immigration policies need to be focused more on what do we as a country need? What type of skills and knowledge do we need? Okay, which, by the way, most Western countries are ahead of us on this.
Let me just ask you a question here. So by the sounds of what you're saying, there should be some level of forgiveness of student debt if the person has done something of some benefit to society.
Correct.
So if I have a home loan and I didn't go to college, but I'm a carpenter or an electrician or a mechanic or something like that, and I do something good, should I have some of my tax bill forgiven or some of my, home loan forgiven or something like that based on that analogy? Or is it only just for the students?
No, but let me tell you what we should do. Okay. I mean, to the extent that people are taking out loans in order to be able to qualify for a trade. All right. That's something that we ought to treat the same. I mean, we have tremendous needs in the trades. All right. And when you look at demographics, there's a big imbalance, and people can make a good living. I mean, my son-in-law is the chief electrician for the Marine Corps Museum. He doesn't have a college degree, but he had to end up engaging in a number of different training and apprentice programs, which you may have to borrow money in order to be able to do that. And that ought to be.
And I can agree. Dave, I can completely agree with the loan forgiveness part, because in something that I'm doing here, even locally, the best way to I guess get community improvement is in terms of dangling that carrot and utilizing college as a way to, okay, well, if you jump into this community service, you jump in as a teacher, you jump in a community need, okay, we'll take care of that. It's a great ideal to work towards, because then that helps improve the community. So I'm all on board with that. But the big thing is about the accountability. How do we go after the predatory lenders? Because that's also part of that, 420 some odd billion that the kids took out. Even with financial literacy, you still can fall victim to these predatory lenders. And so how do we take care of those? Because even banks jump in, hate to say it, in the background of predatory lending, because it's money, it's capitalism.
Well, within the last 20 years, the government is the lender for student loans. It used to be that it was the private sector and with government guarantees. Now it's the government. And that's why the largest asset on the balance sheet of the U.S. government, believe it or not, is $1.7 trillion in student loans. They're a liability to the individuals. They're an asset to the government and to the taxpayers. And as I said, the government's the one that's got to deal with the terms, right? And in fact, there's a difference between modifying the terms and forgiving the debt. For example, during COVID, the president suspended payments. All right. So he didn't forgive payments. He suspended having to make payments. All right. Secondly, he suspended accrual of interest. All right. You know how much that costs taxpayers? $70 billion a year. All right. So the taxpayers lost $70 billion a year because of that. Now, that hasn't been challenged. Probably won't be challenged. Okay. Because because people felt that was reasonable. Whether it was legal, that's a different issue. But when you get to the point where you're saying we're going to forgive, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets or loans on one side, assets on the other, without express congressional approval, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? The United States owns 25% of the land in America. What are you going to do with that? If you're giving away this asset, what about another asset? So that's part of the issue. We ought to have an intelligent discussion about the need for reform on the student loan program, which needs to be reformed.
No, but there got to be reforms across the board. Because David, one of the things that I was curious about, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, is a lot of people are given information, but they are given loans or given breaks, but they don't know necessarily the consequences. I think about what happened during the COVID. A lot of people were living in apartments and they were basically told, don't worry about your rent because, we're going to take care of this and everything. And all along those lines. But of course, the apartment complexes were also going like, yeah, y'all are forgiven for now, but eventually y'all are going to have to pay us. And now some people are now finding that they owe 3 or 4 months back rent and all in that space because that wasn't necessarily explained. It was just said, we're going to give you a break in that space. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that. And I was also wondering your thoughts around, and I know it's a separate issue, community colleges, because you kind of alluded to it. And I know here in North Carolina, we pride ourselves on being a very having a lot of great community colleges. There have been some governors, including Governor Hunt, past governor, that were very much advocates of the community college system and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those today.
I'm a strong supporter of the community college system. I have a nephew who went to community college for 2 years as a transition from high school to, full-time university where he would be away from family. And quite frankly, he ended up getting into UVA, which is one of the best public universities in the country. There's no way he would have gotten into UVA if he tried to apply for UVA right off. All right. And so my view is that community, and I actually spent a semester at a community college. All right. I think it's a great transition between high school and university, traditional university. It helps you mature. It helps you to get more disciplined with regard to, the fact that in high school and at the Naval Academy, you got to be there, right? And if you're not there, you got accountability for not being there. But in university, they don't care if you come or not. As long as the bill paid, they don't care whether you're there or not. So I'm a big believer in that. And you also can borrow money for community college as well, which I think is totally appropriate. And by the way, many people don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. I mean, you just get an associate's degree or whatever. It all depends on what you want to do, right? Part of our society has said you're not going to make it unless you have a college degree. Well, that's bunk. Some of today's billionaires never graduated from college. All right,
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, that's
Lee had also brought up a good question as well, because I'm following the chat because he's dealing with some family matters and all along those lines. But he had actually asked about the notion of should the colleges pay for the loans and all in that space. So a lot of times it is the government that is giving these loans. Like I said before, I've definitely got government loans when I was going to college way back in the ice ages and all in that space. But I was wondering what your thoughts are about the colleges actually providing the money.
Well, I would look, some of these colleges have huge endowments, all right? They ought to be providing more scholarships and more relief. It's not to the point of paying the loans. It's providing more scholarships to worthy students, okay, than they are right now.
What about the fact that they have increased substantially since you went to college, especially the Ivy League colleges, have increased dramatically the costs of university education. In fact, here in Australia, we've had degrees hit $100,000 a year in some cases. Should the universities be told, hey, listen, we're not going to just keep bailing out the students and subsidizing the students so that you can take a subsidy and increase the prices? Should that be a consideration in the budget?
Well, there's absolutely no question that the availability of easy money or easy credit, all right, has served to fuel the willingness and the ability of the colleges and universities to increase their tuition. There's absolutely no question about that. Okay.
But I think Lee's question is, why should the government be going after the taxpayer? Why shouldn't the government be going after the colleges if we're going to talk about, reform in this area in your country or in ours?
Well, clearly that's part of the solution. All right. And, my personal view is that, there's different ways to get a degree now. All right. And what's happened in a lot of universities is they built a lot of bricks and mortar. They've expanded their administrative staff dramatically. Okay. I'll take my son and my daughter-in-law as an example. They went to bricks and mortar for a bachelor's degree. They both got master's degrees online. And I think one of the things that's going to happen with increasing frequency is you're going to see that. You're going to see more and more online learning, and you're going to see more and more global universities. I have a nephew who got a degree, a bricks and mortar bachelor's degree, all right? And now he's getting an online degree in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. And that is a global program. He's got people on that program for all over the world. So I think, I think universities and colleges need to treat it differently, but secondly, they need to provide different options. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And by the way, they're a lot more cost effective.
But they're doing some new innovative things. I'm actually going to toss one to Toby this time, because I know for a fact that in the esports lane, there are a number of colleges, including some colleges here in North Carolina, that are now doing entire programs around esports, because esports is very much a big business and all along those lines. But Toby can tell you much more about it than I can.
So basically, esports is just like the sporting world. How colleges, when those tuitions are going up, that's to pay for a lot of those giant football coaches that come in, football players that come in, and even the other athletics departments that are putting up all this tons and tons of money with these endowments and everything. And now you have the endowments with esports. Esports alone is the biggest business, or the video game industry is the biggest business in terms of entertainment wise. It dwarfs the music and movie industry, including the sports industry. So if you look at the NFL is what, a $70 billion industry, or whatever $1 billion industry it may be. It's not even close. You got the gaming industry is $200+ billion. It grows 40% roughly every year. It jumped drastically in the COVID year because everybody was at home.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The esports industry is a small sliver of that. However, it's already crossed over globally in terms of the top 10 sports globally, because it's hit that $10 billion. Well, that crossed over that $1.5 billion range. It's growing dramatically. And again, that 1.5 is still a part of that $200 billion industry. So it's just ridiculous. So you do have colleges now and other industries that are jumping in because they see it as, just like with colleges, David Walker, you put it perfectly, it's easy money. That's what they see, is easy money. So colleges are now jumping in. For example, UNCG or UNC Greensboro got an endowment for, I think it was $3.5 million to build an esports arena on their campus. There are tons of other colleges that are out there that are steadily building these esports arenas and steadily building these esports teams, because you can recruit these kids to go to these colleges, and then our future itself it's online. So a lot of these industries are looking for these programmers to come out of the industry. So yes, these colleges are starting to pump tons of money into that esports area. However, our mindset hasn't gotten there yet. So speaking of those endowments, and this is why I guess in the chat I put taxes can't be a la carte. We've got to understand that there are certain things that we have to bend on some things. How, David, I think you tried to say, we have to understand. You had pointed out about when you were asked about not going, that it has to be part of the solution. The government has to go after these colleges to work towards that solution. And we have to understand as taxpayers, that is part of that solution. And that $1.7 trillion has to come off the books somehow. And it's not just going to be going after those colleges and not just after those students, because those students, as Mark pointed out, that these individuals are now going to have to start paying these back pays on rents. Well, those same people that are starting to pay those back pay on rents are now going to have to pay that interest in the back pay on the student loans. So now you're dealing with homeless individuals that can't pay not only their college tuition, can't find a home because they can't get credit to get a loan. And then on top of that, now are struggling in the healthcare industry because now their health is all deteriorated. So it's all in that.
But so too are other people who don't have a university degree that have other issues. And
let's
just be honest about something. When we're going to talk about bricks and mortar universities or colleges, please don't try to tell me that people are going to Harvard or any of the other Ivy League universities or the top universities like Stanford, USC, and there's a heap of others. You really think that they're going there because of the education they're going to get? People go to Harvard for the networking they're going to get. When people talk about diversity on the Supreme Court, is there any Supreme Court justices that you can think of that got their law degree from a community college?
They're not allowed to.
No, they don't have a law degree. They get a law degree at community college.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, you know what I'm trying to say, right? The people that goes to these elite schools, they go there because of the opportunities that the networking provides. And I think that asking people who are not ever going to be as privileged as them to pay for it is just totally wrong and immoral, personally.
Well, again, you're taking the extreme and using it as the norm. There are people that do go for that education. But yes, the connections help. And that goes for every school. That includes HBCUs. That includes joining Greek fraternities and sororities. So again, we can't just say, well, we got to pay for Harvard. Well, we're also having to pay for that kid who went to A&T that's struggling because now he's behind on these loans. Now
that kid's fees are not going to be as high as the fees of those big universities.
We have to take out the extremes and talk about the middle ground and how we can help people all around. Of course, there are going to be people that get help that are on that extreme area. But if we focus so hard on that extreme area, then we're going to miss so many people that desperately need it.
Okay, but if you want to help everybody, what about those people that didn't go to college? What's the suggestion as to how to help them? If, for example, the average degree, I don't know how much it costs in the United States, but let's say the average degree is $100,000. Why don't we give $100,000 loans on similar terms to those people that graduate or, that finish an apprenticeship and have a trade so that they can get a start in life? What's the difference? Why don't they get the same benefit?
Shaquille, there's a fascinating thing that is going on right now. It's not like a massive trend, but it is a slower trend where because of NIL deals that are going on in the sports world and because of a push for this to happen, including with some major entertainers and everything, we're actually seeing that some of the athletes that had traditionally started moving more toward the PWIs, like the Kansas, predominantly white institutions like Kansas and UNC and everything, are actually now looking back toward going to the HBCUs because they want to have something that is more directly connected to their own lineage and their own heritage and all along those lines.
Only if they have a good
even before getting to all that real quick, David had just popped Dave just popped up his hand, and I'm curious where he's going to go with the answer to Shaq's question.
Well, first, the 1.7 trillion is never going to be written off. It's not going to be written off. All right. Does the program have to be reformed? Yes, in multifaceted ways. All right. And should there be some modification of terms? Yes, absolutely. Should there be some forgiveness based upon service being rendered that benefits society? Yes, absolutely. Okay. But that's targeted. Okay. That's targeted. And as I said before, our policies need to be focused to a greater extent on our macroeconomic needs for a country and society. All right. And we have needs beyond people who get a 4-year degree or more than that. We have needs dealing with the trades and many other areas that don't even require a college degree. And yes, they ought to be eligible for loans too. And so we need to think more broadly. In many government policies, the policies are based upon conditions that existed decades ago, and they haven't been updated for the current and the future.
Hey, David, along those same lines, we keep talking about these different debts that are existing, whether it's the student debt or whether it's the debt that was created by the PPE loans and all in that space. But there has been a spiraling debt that has kept going up, and that is the debt of the government debt. And I know that we're even thinking about that there might be another government shutdown in October. Now, we're only in July, so October seems a long way away. But is there some way that while we're talking about controlling these debts, that we can control this other massive debt? Because that has been going on as long as I've been living, and I've been just celebrated 61 last Saturday.
We also have massive consumer debt. Look, in my opinion, the only way that we're going to get control of our federal finances is to have a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy the federal government can take on, absent temporary and extraordinary circumstances. And a good example of who to look to, who's already done this through referendum, agreed to by 85% of the public, is Switzerland. Now, we don't have referendum in the United States at the federal level. We only have two ways to get an amendment. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate pass something, they send it to the states, 3/4 ratify. But we have a second way. 2/3 of the states file an application for a convention of states to propose one or more amendments. Congress shall call the convention. They meet. If they can agree on something, they send it to the states. 3/4 of the states ratify. I'm working on that right now. And in fact, shockingly, in 1979, we had 39 states with active applications for a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, and Congress never did anything. And I'm working on a multi-pronged approach, which may end up in a court case that will have to be decided by the Supreme Court to force the Congress to do what they failed to do and what they don't want to do.
I know we're running down, but Lee mentioned zero-based budgeting. I was wondering your thoughts, David, around that, if that's something that is possible or conceivable, because he did mention that. I know Jacoby was thinking that wasn't a great idea, but you are the former Comptroller General, so I'd love to hear your thoughts around zero-based budgeting, which is something that Lee Newton Rhodes brought up and all along those lines.
Well, when I was Comptroller General of the United States and head of the Government Accountability Office, I believe very much that we needed to lead by example, because we were the ones that audited, investigated, evaluated all other aspects of government. And therefore, we had a responsibility to lead by example, practice well, be as good or better than any other government agency, or else we weren't credible. And one of the things that I did was a concept of zero-based budgeting. In the government, the psychology is get the money, spend the money. And the psychology is that whatever you had last year is good. It's a matter is how much more do you need, right? And I said, no. We want anything that we ask for as a one-time item, we take out. Okay, and we need to be able to justify, how many staff we have, how many offices we have, whatever. We should not assume that the base is okay. To make a long story short, during my tenure, I reduced the size of the head count by 15%. I reduced the number of offices by a third. I eliminated a layer of management, consolidated 35 units into 13, focused more on outcomes rather than outputs. And we increased productivity by over 50%, and we increased results. We tripled the return on investment to the taxpayers. So, but that took a concerted effort from the top over many years to make happen. And the problem in government is you don't have that many people that have the interest or ability to do that. And even if they did have the interest and ability to do that, they're not there long enough to get it done.
Yeah, it is unfortunately a big problem also with the leadership we have there. And we do want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, to bring us some insight into the $797 billion forgiveness package. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.